So, Millard, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into leadership, can you tell us a little bit about your journey? Where did you grow up?
I essentially grew up in, I would think the best answer to that is Connecticut, in the United States. It's one of the New England states, and I grew up in a little town called Windsor, and it was an idyllic life in many ways.
And what was your dream career as you grew up?
I don't know if I ever had a dream career as such. At this point in your life, it's hard to remember what you thought about back then. Um, I really don't know if I ever had any kind of ambition at an early age that I'm sure we had all the ones that everyone wants to be, a fireman or an Indian chief or a baseball player or something like that. Those I don't consider real aspirations. And I don't know when I actually discovered an aspiration that is something that I really wanted to be. If there was an answer to it, I think it would have to be that I've always really wanted to make a difference. And I don't know what that has meant. It has meant several things over the course of my life, but I think if there's been anything that's driven me, it's been that desire to have an impact and make a difference. And I never really knew what that was going to mean or how it would play itself out. But over the course of my career, it's been that one sort of lodestar that I follow. Make a difference. Just somehow or another be able to significantly say that your presence has been recorded in a way that people, when they look back at that, it can say, yeah, well, he's done some good things.
And Millard, where did you start your career?
Well, where do you start a career? I suppose it gets when you get paid, the first time you get paid for something. And if that's the indicator, then my first career started on a tobacco farm, picking tobacco. And in and of itself was an interesting, probably lots of little lessons that grew out of that. My brothers and I worked together in the tobacco fields in Connecticut. And not many people know, but at the time, and I don't know if it's still true, but most of the wrappers for cigars were made in Connecticut. They grew tobacco there, and so you had to pick these leaves, and it was an art to this because when you think about it, tobacco, when you wrap it up, it has to be a full leaf that's able to take the chopped up tobacco that goes into it. And you get paid by the number of rows that you can go picking tobacco. And my brothers and I were speed demons, and we were by far the fastest and best team out there. But it really went to coordination, and we early on decided that it was important to think through how to do this. Whereas the other teams were made up of just individuals. We were brothers, and so we had lots of time to collaborate, and we were super.
So you were operating in teams of two.
Three. Two who picked and one who dragged. You started at the beginning of a row of tobacco, and you picked the leaves and you put them underneath on opposite sides so that they faced into a third row. You were picking, and there was a row in between where the dragger would come. And the dragger's responsibility was to cover the leaves into the basket and drag them out. And our responsibility was to pick the tobacco. And we were just, as I say, we're incredibly fast at doing it. But we also worked out that we had to have a way of leveraging the guy who's pulling, because by the time you get to the end of the row, he's pulling a long way back. But because we were so fast as pickers, we could get out and then double load and carry out more, and then allow us to just continue moving. So we made a small fortune in those days picking tobacco, but it's a dirty, dirty job. But it was fun. We were young. We were 14, 15 years old. From there, I think the next sort of big step would have been that I went into the military, and I hadn't done terribly well in high school. It wasn't that I didn't have the capacity, it's just that it just didn't work for a variety of reasons, which are probably too long to go into here. But I graduated in the lower half of the class, probably in the lower third of the class. And at the end, my father basically said, well, look, we've given you a high school education. You haven't done much with it. So, you know, you're going to have to find a job somewhere because everyone in here has to contribute. And the only choices really were the military, because the military understood fairly early on that the best way to recruit people was to have a recruiting office across from the school. So most of us who hadn't been able to get into universities joined the military. And once in the military, I was exceptionally successful. At one stage, I used to have a chapel guide who conducted the teams on to chapel. We used to have a guy who was a flight leader. We also had four or five others, but in fact, I had all of them. I did all of those things. And when I went to my first post, I was promoted. And throughout my career in the military, I was always first promoted. I was Airman of the Month, several occasions, Airman of the Year, and then was selected by the post where I was located to serve as a special envoy to someone. I had no idea who it was going to be, and it turned out to be President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson. And that discussion is probably the most profound discussion I ever had in my life, not with Johnson, which was fun, but with his Secret Service agent, who basically asked me what was I going to do with the rest of my life, and I said I was going to re-enlist, and he said, why? And I explained to him I'd been so successful in the military. Everything I've done very well. And he said, well, why don't you go back to school and get a degree if you're that good? I said, well, I went to school and I was terrible. He said, but you just told me you've managed to be so successful. You don't do that unless you have some level of intelligence and some level of... So on the basis of his advice, I reluctantly then went back to university. And I decided that the only way I could do this was to go to a school where my brother was, because I was so poor at school, I knew that I wouldn't succeed. But before that, I had been an athlete, and I had been playing with we had a football team, and we were the #1 football team in the country. We were at that time in Thailand, and we never got any coverage at all from the Post newspapers. And so I went to the headquarters and said, well, look, why don't you guys cover us? We are the best football team in the country. We're undefeated. We are great. And they said, well, we don't have anyone who can write the stories. And I said, well, I'll write the stories. And so I began writing the stories on all of our games, which were wildly popular. So when I came out of the military, and after this advice from the Secret Service agent, I went to Howard University, and I wrote them in advance of my coming, saying that I was getting out of the military and that I was thinking of going into public relations, and I wondered if they could give me any advice, assistance as to what courses I should take, what should I do. And the head of the public relations department at Howard at the time said, well, why don't you come and work for me, and I'll give you the advice you need. And so I joined the staff of the Howard University public relations department, and because I'd done sports, he put me in charge of sports. And we had a guy there who had been the sports information director, but he turned out to have some problems and was dismissed. And so suddenly I was the sports information director for Howard University in Washington. And as a consequence of the writing that I was doing for press releases and information around sports, the Washington Star newspaper asked if I would be willing to string for them, and that it would mean covering high school sports events. And so I agreed to do that in my spare time. So I was going to school, serving as sports information director for the university, and writing in a part-time basis for the Washington Star newspaper covering sports. the Washington Post saw my writings and then asked if I would join the Washington Post. And so, how can you say no to the Washington Post? And so now I was the sports information director, still a student, and now a full-time reporter for the Washington Post newspaper. And I managed to juggle all those things. But at the same time, because I guess I was much older than most of the students at the time, and because I'd come out of the military, I just was much more focused and driven and directed. And so with school, whereas when I was in high school I had done so terribly bad, at university I graduated Phi Beta Kappa and magna cum laude from Howard. And when they made the award of Phi Beta Kappa, which is the National Honor Society in the United States, I said I didn't deserve this. And he said, why? And I said, well, I just figured out the courses that I knew well, and I took the courses that I knew well, and the ones that I didn't know well, I took on a pass-fail basis, and so that's why I have the grade that I have. And he says, well, that option was available to everyone else. They didn't figure it out, but you did, and that's why you have Phi Beta Kappa. So we get Phi Beta Kappa, and I go off to, I was supposed to have gone to Rhodes University, but at the end of the day, I got a 3-year full scholarship to University of Notre Dame to study law, and I did that. At the same time, I was still writing for the Washington Post, and I finished.
How easy was the access to the sporting stars in your days? When you were reporting these stories about, I guess...
Oh, it was very easy because I was the only black sports reporter at that time, east of the Mississippi, and they had never seen black reporters, or very few of them. So most of the athletes were black, and to have someone who was not only black, but I was pretty much the same age as these guys. So it was fun. It was you hung out with them, you played with them, you played basketball with them, played football with them. It was a great time of life.
So who are the sporting stars that stand out in your memory that
From
you
those
interviewed?
days?
Yes.
Oh, obviously the most important and most significant would be Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali. I wrote several times on him. I did stories on Joe Frazier, Bobby Foster, who was another light heavyweight champion. Basketball players would have been Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Julius Erving. There were just so many. Spencer Haywood. There were golfers, Chichi Rodriguez. They were just.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Muhammad Ali? When you met him, how did he strike you? What did you take away from the person? And
his charisma. I mean, it was just no one quite like him that I've met before or since. He was bigger than life, and he was a big man. He wasn't small, but he was just incredibly smart in ways. I guess one would say street smart, but he absorbed information like no one had ever seen. I mean, he would listen to you. Listen to what you had to say, and he was able to take disparate pieces of information and put it together in his mind in a way that was absolutely coherent, in ways that you would think that professors and those who'd studied all their careers should be able to do and were unable to do. But he was fun. He just was a fun guy just to be around. We used to practice sparring a lot because I have long arms for my size, and we used to always laugh about how long I would be a great welterweight fighter. And in fact, I went into the ring once with Bobby Foster, the light heavyweight champion. Because of that, I was covering him, and I thought it'd be a great story to fight with Bobby Foster.
right.
So we put on my gloves and we go in, and I used to box many years ago when I was young. And I hit him with like one or two quick jabs, bing, 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 and suddenly his eyes, we had on headgear, and his eyes got real wide and they narrowed, and it was like, so you want to play? Let's play. It was the longest 3 minutes of my life. I took a beating like you never can imagine, but It was fun. You know, you write about having a chance to be in the ring with Bobby Foster, light heavyweight champion of the world.
And I believe you start in the Ali movie.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now subsequently, I got asked if I would do a cameo appearance in a movie. I didn't know what the movie was at the time, but I said, "What were you looking for?" And they said they were looking for someone who's about 5'10", you know, heavy set, light complected. And I said, "Well, no, that's not me. I'm 6'2". I'm skinny and dark." And they said, "Let us have a look at you anyway." And I went down to casting, and they took a picture. And the next thing I know, I get a call saying that the director he's happy. He would love to have you come in and do the movie. And off I go, and I found out the movie is Ali, being shot by Michael Mann, the director, and starring Will Smith. It was a great. I don't know when that movie was. It was right around 2000, I think it was initially produced. But one of the great things you're able to say as a consequence is that I've now been in movies. I've been in several movies since then, and also on TV shows. But to be able to say that you have worked alongside of 4 Academy Award winners, it's great. So yeah, Michael Mann, Jamie Foxx, John Voight, and then subsequently Bill Hurt in another movie that I played in. So, you know, to be able to say that you've worked along those kinds of people is just fabulous.
So what role did you play in Ali?
I played George Foreman's doctor, and it was so funny because when I came on into the set, they had said it was a cameo appearance, and for me that just means they take a picture of you and you're off. So we do a scene where George Foreman is training, and I play the role of his doctor. So you wipe him down, and you make sure his chair is there, and you get him water and all the rest of it. And so the filming is over, and I say to everyone, "Thank you very much. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I wish you all the best of luck and success with the movie." And they said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "No, I'm just I've done this cameo appearance here, and." This has been fun, and I got to go back to work. At the time, I was the executive chairman of Black & Veatch Africa, which is a major American construction company that had its operations here in South Africa, and I was the executive chairman. And they said, "But you're in the movie." And I said, "I know. I just did this cameo appearance." And they said, "No. Wherever George Foreman goes for the rest of this movie, you have to be here." And I said, "I can't do that. I run a company. I can't do that." And they said, "But you're already in the movie. We filmed it. We can't do anything else." And so for the next 6 weeks, I flew back and forth from Johannesburg to Mozambique, where the film was being shot. And fortunately, it was the film was being shot at night, so I was able to fly in the evening, and fly in during the day, work all the mornings, fly in the afternoons, do the scenes, and then fly back and be in my office, and that was just, it was crazy. It was just a lot of fun, though. So yeah, that does.
So going back to your sport reporting days, where did you go from there?
I then after leaving, so very interested in South Africa, and I thought that the best way to get that kind of exposure was to go off to a program that focused on international law, and Notre Dame did at that time. And they had a special program where you spent a year in London, and I took that program where I studied at the School of Oriental and African Studies and the London School of Economics. And I then sort of thought, well, maybe I should try and see if there are any American law firms who would be interested in my serving as an intern. And Sherman and Sterling in New York had an office in London, and they asked me if I would come and join them. I did, and then they hired me for their program, and I spent 4 years working on Wall Street as a corporate lawyer. But at that stage, I was much more interested in what was going on in South Africa, and I had been running programs with the American Bar Association, and I put on a conference called the International Legal Implications of Apartheid. And I got funding from that from the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was an enormously successful conference. So much so that one of the parties who had attended the conference was later appointed U.S. ambassador to the Human Rights Commission, and asked me if I would join his team as a private sector member of the Human Rights Commission, and it was great. We were in Geneva, and the issue of South Africa came up on the agenda, and he asked me what did I think about what should be the position of the United States. And I gave him my views, and he said, well, can you write that? And I said, sure. So I wrote it up and I gave it to him. I'm expecting him as the ambassador to give the presentation, and he says, well, can you give this? I said, what do you mean give this? He says, I want you to present this tomorrow before the Human Rights Commission. I said, me? And he said, well, you wrote it. I don't know anything about South Africa. You're the only one who knows anything about it, so you should be the person who delivers the U.S. position. So I get trotted out to deliver the American position on South Africa, which later turned out to be a turning point in my career, because as a consequence of the remarks I made, President Carter asked me if I would become the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs. And so there I was at a fairly young age. I think it was about 32 or 33 years old. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights in the U.S. government. And I served until the end of the Carter administration. And then, what did I do then? I think I started a legal practice with one of my colleagues, focusing on Africa. And I also began teaching. I taught at Georgetown University jurisprudence and constitutional law, and also at Touro University in New York. Georgetown, I was an adjunct professor. At Touro, I was an associate professor. And I did that for a while, and then I was asked if I would go and become policy advisor to the government of Botswana on private sector development, which I then went and did. And during that period, Clinton was running for election, and I was asked if I would be interested in becoming the executive director of the World Bank for the U.S. government. And I said, well, I'd like to consider it. And Ron Brown, who was then the Secretary of Commerce and who was subsequently killed in a plane crash, but we had known each other from previous times, actually played basketball together. And he said to me, I understand that you are considering becoming the executive director of the World Bank. And I said, well, I'm giving that some thought. And he said, well, I'll tell you why you won't. And he made this compelling argument, and he culminated the argument by basically saying, but more important than anything else is, I know your wife, and I know she's from South Africa, and if she were to ever learn that you had an opportunity to serve as the first U.S. Minister Counselor to the African continent and be based in South Africa, and you turned it down, he said, you'll never go home again. So on the basis of that, I said, Mr. Secretary, I understand why you are Secretary, and I became the first ever U.S. Minister Counselor for the continent of Africa in commercial affairs. And I did that for 5 years. And we had tremendous success as a team here. I had some very great people working with me, and we were so good that we were awarded the U.S. Department of Commerce's Gold Medal for Outstanding Achievement in the Federal Service. And it was the whole team that received it, and I was so pleased that we were able to bring that kind of panache to what we were doing. From there, I went on to become the chairman of Black and Veatch, which I mentioned earlier, which was when the film of Ali was being made. And then from that, I joined the board of Murray & Roberts as executive director and group legal counsel. And I served that until I retired and joined Bowmans as senior advisor and special representative, providing commercial and strategic advice to our clients. So that's the career.
And today, I believe at the age of 71, you're living the portfolio life. And you're serving in a number of activities, in a number of roles, not just as a lawyer.
Yeah, no, I'm also the chief executive officer of the South African Business Schools Association, which is all 18 business schools here in South Africa. And I serve as chairman of Project UBU, which is an extraordinary undertaking in which we are looking at marrying the idea of a universal basic income with a cryptocurrency. And in fact, we just launched today our pre-ITO documents, and we're expecting to go go live with our ITO on the 29th of September. So that's the other project I'm involved in.
Is that for the country?
It's for the world. It's a global it's an initiative. We will start it here in South Africa, but the idea of looking at ways of making a difference through the concept of a universal basic income, but doing that with cryptocurrency is new. It's never been done anywhere else. We'll do it here in South Africa first, and hopefully we'll find the right formula that will allow us to take it global. So that's one project. And then I've served as the honorary business representative for the government of Singapore until just recently. And what else do I do? I sit on a number of boards. In addition to the Project UBU board, I sit on Generator Plant Hire for South Africa, Sonatla Capital as an advisory board member. There are some nonprofit organizations like the Biko Foundation and the Quartet of Peace, on which I'm active. And then, probably most important of all, is my art. I'm a photographer and artist, and so I spend a lot of time, whenever I can find it, doing photography and painting, and the odd acting role when it comes up.
And I believe you wrote 2 books about Steve Biko.
Yes. There are 2 books that have just come out. They're literally we launched the first one on the 5th of September. It's called The Testimony of Steve Biko, and it's a fascinating book because what happened was that following Biko's death, no one in America had any idea who Steve Biko was, and we had been providing financial assistance to the lawyers who were handling the case in which Steve appeared as a witness, and they had sent me his transcript of his appearance before the court, and it was mesmerizing. And so the more I read of it, the more I realized that this document needed to be published. And I also recognized that I was probably the only person who could do it because Biko was banned in South Africa. They were clearly not going to allow this to be seen in South Africa. So I took the book and I took the transcript and edited the transcript and turned it into a book which was published by Random House. And it was the first that many in America had ever heard of Steve Biko. Subsequently, this now being the 40th anniversary of his death, I was asked if I would republish the book, which is what we've just done. We republished that book, The Testimony of Steve Biko, which has never been published in South Africa. No one's ever seen it, and it is the most complete and compelling documentary of what Steve Biko stood for. So I'm very pleased that that's out. And then the second book was called No Fears Expressed, which is a collection of quotations of Steve Biko, which I put together, which help explain his thinking on a variety of issues, from black attitudes to what it is that black folks needed to do to affect the kind of change they needed to see, to the very basic concepts of humanity and Ubuntuism. So it was a great book.
So Millard, let's talk about leadership. What does the future of leadership mean to you?
Well, I've always thought leadership is a great deal more to do with collaboration than it does what most people think of when they think of leadership. I think the traditional notion is there is someone who stands in front and he or she is the leader. And then they will give directions to the followers who will then proceed. And I think in this day and age, in an era which I've heard often being referred to as the VUCA era, where everything is, what does VUCA stand for now? I forget now. It's a VUCA environment. But
Volatility,
uncertainty. C is VUCA.
constant change, I think.
But a VUCA environment.
Sure.
I don't think very few of us have the wherewithal to lead in such an environment. And what it really requires is collaborative leadership. And for me, that is the future of leadership. Every one of us has leadership capabilities within us. We are good at certain things, not good at others. And where collaboration comes in is to be able to recognize your shortcomings and where it is that you need to engage with others, and to find ways in which those strengths can merge and marry to achieve results. If by leadership you need to be a figurehead and be the chairman of the board or the CEO or something of that, that's not my view of leadership. That's not my view of leadership. Leadership is much more about collaboration. It's much more about, in some ways, a level of equity and equality, because everyone has skills. You just need to be able to pull those skills out and utilize them. So it's collaborative efforts that are pulled together in ways that allows people to achieve the very best that they can individually and collectively. I've always been surprised when I was minister counselor. I used to always have everyone who worked on my team at our team meetings, and that included the tea ladies, the drivers, the stock guys, everyone. And the thing was, what you found is that they often had insights that no one else had, practical insights about doing things. About how the cars should be set up, or how the room should be set up, or where. We had one of the tea ladies who pointed out that it was always a problem because when we were in conferences, the other sides could hear the other conference, the other side of the wall could hear what we were talking about, and that she always found that kind of strange that people would have private conversations yet everyone could hear. Well, we hadn't thought about that. We weren't really aware of it. So we put up insulations in the wall so that we could have much more private conversations when it was necessary. But you can get wisdom from anyone. No one possesses all the wisdom in the world. And really, it's just about trying to find ways that you can collaborate, work together, and achieve results.
And what have you learned from your own journey that you consider really important for building future leaders?
Don't know. I think to constantly want to achieve, constantly seek to do the very best that you can at whatever you can. But the other thing I think that comes out of it, I hadn't thought about until just now, but I've been listening to my own self talk. I think it is a willingness to take chances, a willingness to always feel that you can make something happen. And I think back to some of those stories I've just said and to you. When I was playing on the football team, and we didn't have anyone who could cover the stories because there was no journalists available, and you decide you can do that. I didn't think it was going to be that hard to write. I don't know whether it is or it isn't, but I did it. And that made a fundamental difference, to my life, because I then went on to school and became a journalist and worked for the Washington Post. But, someone asks you if you can act, and you think, well, I can't do that, but you do it. One of the great successes that I had when I was with the State Department was we met with representatives from Liberia at the time, and they had just had a military coup and taken over, and they had put a number of people in prison. And I met with the Minister of Justice from Liberia, and we had this really great conversation, and it was great only because he came in expecting to be lectured to by the United States. He came in expecting someone who was going to be high-handed with him. And we sat and we talked. I asked him about his family. We had the most enjoyable conversation. And then I said to him that what they were trying to do in Liberia, we understood what gave rise to the coup, the military coup, but that they were undermining the very success they had by keeping political prisoners, because it only went to demonstrate that they were no different and no better than the government that they had replaced. And he looked at me and he thought about that, and then he went back. And a few weeks later, I got a letter from him, which I still have framed in my home. And it says, as a consequence of your conversation and the matters that we discussed, I just wanted to let you know I've released 27 political prisoners. And I've always thought that if I've done nothing else in government, the fact that 27 people were able to walk free as a consequence of just being able to have a kind of discussion with someone that allowed him to take that step, to give him the kind of comfort that would make it possible for him to resolve an issue that was troubling the country. And I think it's always been to put yourself in the other person's place, to remain humble, to think about how you can make a difference, and never give up. I think those are things that have epitomized what I've tried to do. And I guess in the end, somewhere along the line, even though I'm enormously insecure, to have confidence in yourself. And I don't know if those two things seem to make sense, but to believe in yourself. And I do, even though I, as I say, I lack all kinds, I'm massively insecure, but I do believe in myself.
And Millard, you've been mentoring many aspiring leaders throughout your career. Can you maybe share a success story or two with us where you mentored a youngster and that person took your advice to heart?
Yeah, there are a number of people who've gone on to run subsequent organizations that I've been involved with. I'm trying to think of someone who would be the best. There was a young lady that joined me as the secretary, and I just always was impressed again with her foresight and her can-do-ness. She always was managed to get things done. She has gone on to become a highly successful advocate, and whenever I see her, she always kids me about the fact that I'm no longer your PA, and and she isn't. She's become a highly successful advocate, done exceptionally well. There have been others who have who I can think of right now that would not. I don't like taking credit for any of these because I don't know if really I can. I think really everyone's leadership journey is their own, and all that you can do is impart to them things that might help them along the way. You give them sort of advice about how to do things or how not to do things, and just make sure that they continue to strive and achieve. There have been a lot of very successful colleagues of mine that I'm very proud to have been a part of their lives.
And last but not least, are there any role models of leadership that you would suggest aspiring leaders should study, maybe learn from?
I don't know if I can say any. I think what makes a great leader is having as wide and deep of an understanding of human nature and the world in which we live. So the more broader you can develop your understanding of the world, the more successful a leader you can be, because you will just have a better appreciation of the kinds of things that it takes to be successful. Are there individuals who've done that? Yeah, there are thousands of them. I'm sitting here looking at a picture of Richard Branson. I mean, sure, he's certainly one. We live in a country where Nelson Mandela has been so important. I've just done a book on Steve Biko, who has been just a leader unlike any that you can imagine. And there are leaders at all spheres of endeavor, from those who you don't know much about, who run small businesses, to mothers at home who, and I don't think most people ever really appreciate that most leaders are being trained by mothers who bring their children up to be successful young people and who give them the ingredients and they give them the first lessons about being successful. And so if you really want to know where leadership comes from, generally it comes from mothers. It comes from those women who raise children, and they need to be given credit. They're the ones who do it best.
Now, Millard, where can people follow you? How should they connect with you?
Oh, well, I'm on LinkedIn, thanks to you, Nick, and some of your advice. But LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on, my photography is all on Instagram. That Arnold, what is it? Arnold Millard, I think it is. I've reversed the names
Right.
on Instagram, and I'm on Facebook. And what else? Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, I think. Yeah,
Well, Millard, thank you so much for sharing your insights. You
I hope it was useful.
You are an incredible inspiration, and I must say your storytelling is captivating. And thank you so much for showing us what is possible and for building the future.
Well, thank you, Nick. Thanks for doing this, because this is really going to inspire young people and I don't feel that I'm a leader of any kind. I accept that, I've done things, but I looked at the list of people that you've cited, and I know many of them very well, and they are exceptional leaders. And to be able to put something like this together, which can be made available to young people, phenomenal. Thank you.